Cube is a 1997 Canadian independent science fiction horror film directed and co-written by Vincenzo Natali, starring Nicole DeBoer, Maurice Dean Witt, David Hewlett, and more.
What the hell is going on?
We haven't been moving in circles, the rooms have. We are the key. The cube is us.
Welcome back to the Cult of Films. Holy cats, we're talking about 1997's Cube. I can't believe we haven't done an episode about this, because this was one of my favorite cult films from back in my Blockbuster days, and I think it was one of, at least another one of the people in the cast tonight. Jason, this was one of your suggestions. Why are we talking about Cube?
Because you wanted to talk about cult movies on this show. This is a cult movie. I don't know, I'm surprised you didn't do this without me. Like, I made a lot of suggestions. This is merely my second favorite Maurice Dean Witt movie, and you already did Hedwig and the Angry Inch without me.
You got there. I thought I was going to come out with a little trivia.
This watch through of Cube like this. Where do I know that dude from? And it turns out it was from the old direct-to VHS RoboCop TV series. I recognize him from.
It wasn't Sergeant Luther Robinson going, "Oh, you're a boy? That's very nice."
Damn, handsome. I can't believe you're not a girl. You're so fine. Why don't you take the whole bag?
Close up on the lips. Johnny!
There's gumdrop references in both movies. There's
oh, shit.
There's a lot going on.
Who knew that the real sequel to Hedwig, or actually to Cube, because Cube came out first, was, this film. So, Johnny, did you know about Cube?
I think I heard something about it. I think I remember hearing about the trailer back in the 90s, and I've definitely found clips of this movie going down YouTube rabbit holes in the last 10 years. So, I had like a kind of like the off on the edges kind of awareness of it, but I didn't really like know it as Cube. Like, never really understood this was that movie. And it was all right. It was interesting.
Okay. This is definitely a cult classic. Like, people love this movie, but no one talks about it. Like, there's no videos about it. It was just a thing that kind of came and went. And I think it was because it was in that weird spot of the late 90s where it was like pre-YouTube. So there wasn't really like, it was too cult for like the big, like Siskel and Ebert to review it.
Nobody went back for it. Right. Like,
we'll come back for him.
That's a lie, and you know it.
This isn't anybody's favorite cult movie.
Mm-hmm.
I guess there's not a lot about this movie, and I guess it's because you can't talk too much about this movie without giving it the whole thing away, because like, as much as it's involved, and I think it was paced well, I think the writing's fantastic, and I wish Andrei Bivelik had written more than just this. This was a cool movie, but you can't talk much about the movie without starting to give stuff away, because really the thrust of this movie is the people in the cube figuring out the cube, and you can't talk about the cube without revealing what they figure out, which gives away the movie. So I think this movie is hard to talk about. So there will be some potential cube spoilers in this. So we're going to try to pique your curiosity without spoiling anything. But if we do get a little bit spoilery, like this movie came out 25 years ago, like, what are you waiting for?
You've had many, many weekends to figure this one out.
And that's the craziest thing, because watching it looks timeless. It really does. It could be set in any time. Like the fact that it's from 1997, it could be from today. Everyone is just in like prison type clothes, and every single set is exactly the same. So it really has this like odd timeless, and that's like disorienting also. I guess we'll kind of like flirt around like the plot lines and stuff, and then if we do, I'll warn everyone when we go super spoilery if we do. But you have a couple characters, and everyone is kind of serving a purpose. And that's kind of like revealed also. Like, everyone, there's a certain type. There may be a reason why all these people are like the professions they are and thrown together, but there's also that might not mean anything either. It's so ambiguous, and usually when movies are like that non-linear, it kind of drives me nuts. But the more like shit that's like up in the air and not revealed, even watching the entire film, is its strong suit. The director and the writer, they got rid of a lot of the backstory of these characters because everything was super spelled out, everything was super fleshed out, and a lot of it took place outside of the cube, which they did in, I think, the third movie, and those in the sequel and the third movie were just like panned. Like no one liked them because the point is like this was just like
they showed too much of the mechanical shark, right?
Totally, yeah.
Like Cube worked because Bruce didn't work properly, right? I mean, Hypercube the writing wasn't even good.
No,
you if you get too much about the backstory, it just, I don't know, like no one cares about that.
It's the magic trick, right? It's like,
yeah. So the fact that they get away with not sharing a bunch of backstory because these people don't trust each other.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. That was a good way to write that away. And like you don't even realize they did it till you get to the end of the movie. You're like, oh yeah, when they do start talking about each other's background, like that's a plot point too.
And some of those things are extremely relative or very useful to the situation. I mean, some like one or two of them are invaluable to getting to where they need to be. But some of them, like, there's no reason for really, like, a doctor or a cop or, you know, all that was more misdirection, I think. That certain people were just like, oh, I'm this. And then later on, it's like, fuck all, that doesn't matter at all. Like, they didn't prove to be useful in the least. They were actually detracting from the entire situation, so. I
think the biggest tragedy about this movie not getting discussed a ton is the fact that I feel like this influenced a lot of stuff that came after it. Like, this spawned some bad sequels, and that's too bad.
Yeah.
But I feel like Saw, the whole Saw franchise, draws pretty heavily from this. From, like, 2000s on, I think was heavily influenced by a movie like this. The first Saw movie could not have been made without this movie.
I can definitely see that. And it's almost, I like the way, one thing I did like about this movie was how they open up with this character that we never get to really know until he's taken out.
What an intro. Shit.
And then they show you, you know, they bring in that late 90s CGI, which is so antiquated for us today, but like, you know, it was cutting edge back then.
It actually didn't even look that bad.
It was, yeah, and it was good for its time. But what happened was to me, it was like they set you up for a gore fest in that opening scene. And then they just tuck it away. Like, they bring it out here and there throughout the movie, but it really turns into this kind of psychological thriller. It's like you've got a bunch of head games going on, and I like the way they did that. Like, the potential is there, that jump scare factor is there, but they use it. It seemed like they used it sparingly. Like, so you've got this guy who shows up. We open up on his eyeball, and we get to see like, oh, he's in gray prison drab, and he's in this weird room, and he's checking out these doors.
Not Jackie Earl Haley, yeah.
Yeah. So he jumps into this second room, and all of a sudden you just hear a shing, and he just stops cold in his tracks, and he starts bleeding along these straight lines. And basically, the room that he walked into was a gigantic Swiss cheese-o-matic, and decided it was going to cut him into cubes. Literally, it cuts him into cubes. And then after he falls in pieces to the floor, you see this like razor-thin wire grid work come back down from the ceiling, and then it just folds itself up. And you know, like, okay, rooms are traps. Let's see what happens. It's almost like, this is what your expectation is. This is what they can walk into. Let's see how many people go that way. And you're left the rest of the movie wondering who's going to get it, how are they going to get it, and why.
And if they'd had more money and a bigger cast, they might have been tempted to have more traps.
Well, that's what's so effective. The gore and everything is that it's so sparing. So when shit does finally happen, I mean, these people are going through room after room after room, and everything, it's literally one set that they built. And the only thing they did was switch out the color panels on the wall, which was like a horrible, like painstakingly long thing to do, like labor intensive. So what they did is they took all the blue room scenes and they shot everything. Then they took all the red room scenes and they shot it. So they shot it out of order, which most films do. But in this case, they did it to match whatever the set piece was, because it was such a pain in the ass to change the colors. It's only 90 minutes long. It's not super long or anything. It's not Lord of the Rings, but like to keep your audience that on edge, because your sphincter is like this the entire time, because you're always on the edge of a mousetrap, and that wears on you after a while. You start feeling fatigued like the people that are going through this shit. And I think the biggest successful idea that they did was the remove all like food and water thing, because that really puts like a ticking clock on top of everything else.
And then how you see some of the characters kind of devolving through the process, and it's almost like there's some kind of tacky I don't know. To me, some of the caricatures it felt like caricatures. It felt like the Doctor was overly paranoid and overly intense.
They came into our homes. They stripped us bare. They took my rings. They took... Oh, my amethyst.
And then you see the cop is starting to really devolve. And actually, as we get further into the movie, all I can think about is the Space Madness episode of Ren and Stimpy, because his eyes got that intensity. He's nuts. He's lost it. Now we know it. Like, we had suspicions, but now we know.
Put in there to be nuts. You couldn't have a sane cop in there. Right. Like, so they were equipped with everything they needed to solve the cube, basically. Right. But, on top of the traps, I think they pit the people against each other. They meaning they being people you don't see. Whoever selected the team for the cube, You know that they had the cube built. Somebody paid to have the cube made, and then they put the people in it, right? So they gave the team everything they needed to get out if they worked together properly. But they also had inner strife, as another layer of traps. So that becomes interesting too, how that reveals itself.
It was almost like the Incredibles thing, where like they built that robot, and then it would like take out a couple of supers, and then the supers would kill it, and then they'd up the game. So it just makes you wonder, like, how many different it was this the first batch of people? How many different people have they run through this before? And that's the fun things to think about afterwards, is because everything is still like, who knows what is really going on. But like I said, some people in this, it really breaks some of the characters down, but some characters thrive. Like this might be their calling to if not help people get out, but also like experience this. Like it's so Kafka-esque, and that's why I was watching this. I'm like, this is why Jason likes it, because this is like Kafka, like in a nutshell. Well, in a cube shell.
Well, it's funny because the platform, the movie The Platform, that's on like Netflix. That's been described as Kafka-esque a lot too, and Platform and Escape Room and a few other movies like that, like, drew a lot of influence from this movie. It wasn't just stuff that was vaguely influenced, like Saw. Like a movie like Platform was like 95% cube.
Sure. Hunger Games, right? Like there's a lot of that in here.
Well, no, I don't know about that. Not everything is cube. You're like Battle Royale, clearly. Like,
right.
Well, it's funny I mentioned Battle Royale because there actually is a Japanese remake that Vincenzo is producing that's coming out this year, I think, on Netflix.
Nice.
So it's a Japanese director, probably a Japanese cast, but Vincenzo is he's very much involved. He's an EP on it, so like that looks like it'll be pretty interesting.
I think his most commercially well-known film is Splice, that I think came out in like 2010 or something, and I haven't seen it. It was movies like this that got him the clout to make those.
He's doing
budget films.
Ton of really good TV right now.
Yeah, I saw that. He's like directing The Stand.
Listen to this run. Orphan Black, Hannibal, Luke Cage, The Strain, American Gods, Lost in Space, Westworld, The Movie in the Tall Grass, episodes of Lock and Key, episodes of The Stand.
Damn.
Like,
wow.
everything I've really liked in the past couple of years, he's directed a couple episodes of.
Yeah.
Wow,
So,
that's pretty awesome.
I don't know, he wasn't super duper active between 2002 and like 2013. You know, he did Splice and he did like a couple movies, but he's just doing a shitload of TV right now. So good for him.
Yeah.
And like initially it doesn't show up. If you go scoping out IMDb, you talk about Vincenzo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like he only worked. It almost looks like he only did 10 years, and they're just like, yep, done. But obviously, there's a lot more going on there.
Yeah, he's on a run.
He's crushing it right now. It's good for him.
I guess the detracting thing for me, or at least the part that doesn't hold up, is maybe some of the performances, especially from Quentin. Or even though he's my boy from Hedwig, he is kind of he's on a different level with those crazy eyes, which is kind of makes some of the scenes a little more unintentionally comical. And maybe it was just because I'm like, dude, that's Sergeant Luther Robinson, but I
they told him to be scary.
Yeah.
Right? He was scary. He was supposed to be scary. Everybody is a foot and a half shorter than him.
Right.
Right. But I get where John's coming from. It was like the eyes, like he dialed his intensity up to 11.
He chewed on the scenery a little bit.
Oh,
just
hard.
Just a little bit.
The trap's living. We are the key. I'll get us down there. You think us out. Believe in me. Try and see what I see. How my mind works. The flash when I look into someone's head like a fucking X-ray.
He definitely. Some pieces felt a little bit like overacting. I'm gonna go. Him and I'd say the character Holloway was at the doctor.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. They both kind of seemed a tad over the top, and that did kind of reel you back from it a bit, just to be, this almost feels like, is this a Theater 101 piece? This seems intense. More intense. Too intense? No, I don't know.
Because I think that Jason's right. Like, it's written really well, and it's probably pretty scary. Like, he's doing some pretty terrible things, or implying that he wants to do some pretty terrible things, especially to another character. But it's just the delivery sometimes, where, it's just really acting to the back of for the people in the back of the room, but with his face. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be the part of the night where I annoy Jason, because every time we do something, I'm always comparing this to something else. But you think of a movie like
that tweet about the guy that's only seen the movie Boss Baby, watching his second movie ever. Like, I'm getting some real Boss Baby vibes here. That's you when you talk about.
No, this
is a lot like Jim Jarmusch, because he's the director I just got done studying.
And it's funny that you mentioned this, but I thought of Starry Eyes, which is another film that I just did an episode on. But so there's absolutely nothing original about like the plot of Starry Eyes, but the execution is so flawless, and that's what kind of elevates something like that's like a completely unoriginal story, but just the craft of the filmmaking is what makes that film memorable at all. This is kind of the exact opposite of that, where the idea of this was so good that it was so interesting that there was almost like no way that it could have just completely fallen flat on its face. I mean, maybe being directed by like Tommy Wiseau, but
again, I would say you can laugh, you can cry, you can express yourself, but please don't hurt each other.
So, but besides that, like, that's where you could kind of look over some of the overacting and some of a little bit of the plot holes and stuff. There is a lot of movie logic going on in this film that you just kind of brush away because you're so like engrossed and ready to see what's in the next room.
All right. It's time to reassess this place.
I've been over it again and again.
In the scene where they find the edge of this facility that they're all trapped in, and they've got the doctor dangling out the rope made of cloth, and then they're deciding to pull her back in, and Quentin's there pulling her back in, and just like he's got her hand, and suddenly his face goes like dead cold, and I'm like, there we go. All right, now we know who we're dealing with. That works.
Yeah.
that scenes like that was like, and that's where it drove her home. Like, this is not, the cube isn't where you're going to find these gruesome killings. It's going to be this, like, they're going to eat each other from within in that moment. And that's where it's like, okay, this is not gore fest. This is psychological thriller. And that kind of, that shifted the gears, I think, in the end. That's where it really, like, the most they tease you with is the room with the sound sensors. Like, they show you what it is, and then they get through it with that one last moment where the one guy goes, ah, and then suddenly Quentin's gotta, like, dive in there. But, like, nope, that's it. Nobody else really gets it other than one other character. And that's kind of like, that was cool how they teased you with this Gorefest Saw style thing, but they only teased you with it, and then they get to the end and movie logic comes into play, and you're like, what do you mean? You heard the door, come on. That was
pretty telegraphed.
I'd be running for that door.
The group they put together was meant to antagonize each other. You know, we found out one of the guys like, oh, I built this place, and, you know, Holloway knew about everyone's families and stuff like that. Like, the stuff came out, everything came out exactly when it needed to. They figured out what to do in exactly when they needed to, but they figured out not to trust each other.
Yeah.
When they needed to also. So, like, the pacing of this was really good for, like, a first-time director and a first-time writer. My God, this movie was really executed well.
And it was like the pie thing too, because, like, they got the math and stuff right. So if you could
not that the math was super complicated on this,
right? But I mean, just you have to have some balls to attempt something that has technical things that you could, like, prove or disprove as your first outing. Like, you know, most first directors are like, can I get the lighting right? Can I get the shot right? Like, this guy went all in.
You could talk to any math professor and it's like, could you design a thing where there's a code? And they're like, oh, well, what if you... Like, I mean, some of the math was clever because they had a few red herrings. You're like, oh, prime numbers. And then they're like, that's not correct. It's actually the power prime. But they just assumed it was prime because the first prime had one factor. So, like, oh, anything to the power 1 is also prime. So... They had a few things where it could reveal itself, and how they figured it out was cool. So, like, there was enough complexity to the math that, like, you could have a few assumptions and that proved to be faulty, and people are getting picked off as they figure it out.
Right.
So, like, that was cool, but at the same time, like, the math wasn't anything. It wasn't the movie, like, Primer, right? Like, it wasn't too complicated that you can't figure it out. Like, you know, the wiki page for the math in this is 4 paragraphs.
Oh, I would have been screwed.
Read it in 30 seconds. So, like...
I don't know my times tables. I would have been dead in the first room.
Oh, yeah. It's a prime number, John. You're like... It's not divisible by anything other than itself or 1.
I know prime rib steak. What? Can I eat it? I don't know.
What's a prime rib? It's like, there's no food in this cube, so I'm making us hungry. If you think about prime rib, it keeps the saliva going. I swallow my button.
Johnny, at what point were you like, yep, they're gonna eat Ren? I thought we were gonna have an alive moment, like.
Oh, the moment I knew Ren was about to go was when he was talking too much.
Oh, sure.
Like,
yeah,
that's kind of the obvious tell. Like, you've got, you know, at the point that happens, you've already been through a multitude of rooms, and he's been kind of this strong, silent type. He's like, he doesn't say much, just give me your boots. And then suddenly he goes into this giant monologue, and it was one of those Walking Dead moments. Like, you supporting characters in Walking Dead.
This is too much exposition, dude.
Yeah.
You're shooting your exposition wad in one go. I don't think
you see the camera zooming in on you? Don't stop talking.
That's right. You're about to go. It's sort of like as soon as one of those supporting characters in Walking Dead got more lines, they're like, oh, Jesus, damn it.
Yeah. You don't keep Kazan telling everyone he's a human computer day 1.
So Ethan Embry got eaten by a walker that was stuck in a tree while he was walking by.
Oh God.
Yeah, but you know what? That character proved to be one of the most invaluable. Like they used the thing that they learned from that guy, who's essentially no more than a red shirt, throughout the entire thing. So,
and he had good stuff. Like he kind of cued him in. It's like there's more than one kind of sensor here, so watch out.
Right. Yeah.
And that was I was happy to see him go. Not that I was happy to see his.
Because he relied on the group, not the other way around.
Right. Yeah, he was through what? How many rooms before that? Before he even met up with them, and that was the. Yeah, everyone had their Achilles heel, and the cop guy was unfortunately the young girl, which was really creepy. But
like numbers, a man and a woman, two halves of the equation. I take you down. The perfect key. I slip you in the lock.
Very uncomfortable, and it's very metaphorical too. Like you could turn it off and be like, oh wow, that was cool. It was about this group of people that made it through this thing or didn't or whatever. But then also it's just like, oh, it's a metaphor on capitalism, or it's a metaphor for whatever. It's allegorical. It checks all those boxes without feeling like it's pandering to anything.
It's class, right? It's all the blue collar and white collar people tearing each other apart while like the cube masters sit and laugh.
Right. Yeah.
It's not red room or blue room. It's the cube masters. This is what the Koch brothers did with their money. Do you know how enormous something that is 26 cubes plus another cube length all the way around would be? It would be larger than the huge room that NASA builds space shuttles in, and that room is so tall it has clouds on the ceiling.
That's why Soros finally retired.
This would be how tall that room is in every dimension.
Yeah, good.
That's huge.
This is the Koch brothers. Just like nobody lives in Montana, so we bought
We bought a cube.
We bought 500 acres outside Bozeman, and we made a murder cube where we let poor people run around like hamsters eating each other.
Sure.
And they filmed it.
Yeah.
Closed circuit, of course. But still, it's on tape.
I didn't see the cameras. That's the crazy part. I'm like, why is this? This should be playing 24/7 on all the rooms in Mar-a-Lago, right? Like, prime entertainment.
Yeah. It didn't go that cabin in the woods route. Like, it didn't push too far into. It didn't make it a parody. Like, it was still something to take seriously.
Well, I feel like this influenced more stuff, right? Like, this is the kind of movie that gets parodied.
Like in Eternal Sunshine, you can't make a sequel to Eternal Sunshine. Like this should have been a one and done. And I know it was a fun thing. So they're like, oh, it's a horror movie. It made like quadruple the budget and people really liked it. So we got to make like 8 of them. But what they did was just explain everything. They just did the behind the scenes of what was really going on, and everyone fucking hated it, and rightfully so.
I'm wondering if like this movie also had any influence on things like Resident Evil. And how they,
there was
put some of that together.
Pretty much a shot for shot, like exact. Somebody got caught up with lasers as opposed to the grid, but like
right, yeah.
Got it.
In Resident Evil, somebody definitely got cut into cubes also.
Oh, geez, there's another one too. It's like a haunted house movie, something to do with ghosts. And I'm trying to remember. It was House the actress, like the main character was the actress who played the foreign exchange student in American Pie.
Oh, 13 Ghosts.
13 Ghosts. Like now that I'm thinking about it, 13 Ghosts seems to have some like this. I can see some pieces between the two of those. Like 13 Ghosts had a bunch of funky rooms with traps.
What about Ghost Ship when like all those people got decapitated by the cable?
That was one of the that was one of the things that came to mind for me actually when in that opening scene, that like Ghost Ship. I see the wires and like, well, that's sort of like Ghost Ship did it with one wire, but they did it with all these wires.
I'm such a sucker for any kind of where the place is the antagonist. I think I like that more than like just your normal, like, you know, Mike Myers or someone coming after you. It's like trying to get out of this place or figure out the place, like an Event Horizon or 13 Ghosts. Like 13 Ghosts is shit. Like it's a bad movie, but it's just cool in the fact that it's just like the people are against, you know, the place that they're in, or even the haunting, all that stuff, like House on Haunted Hill, Ghost Ship, all those. The Shining is probably the best example. You know, those type of films really scratch that itch for me.
Did you know that Hypercube was written by the guy who wrote the 2011 Conan movie and directed by the cinematographer from Pulp Fiction, American Psycho, and Reservoir Dogs?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
And that's what they came up with, huh?
Cube 2 Hypercube is to Cube 1 as American Psycho 2 is to American Psycho 1. Like, it was...
Wait, there was a sequel to American Psycho?
Oh, it was direct to DVD starring Mila Kunis and William Shatner. It was like the MTV movie comedy version of American Psycho. It was so, like, disparate. It couldn't have been more different in, like, tone. It was really weird. It was just not American Psycho.
Right.
You know, it was completely different. Everything about it was crazy. So you watch it and you're like, don't know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting this. Like, do yourself a favor and watch American Psycho 2.
So
you'll be like, how is this? It's a surreal experience.
Angrier. Deadlier. And sexier than ever before.
It's not just like the movie's bad, but the tone of it is weird.
Mm-hmm.
It was like remember MTV Studios was making movies like that movie about the cheerleaders that robbed the bank and shit like that.
Wow, I completely forgot MTV Studios was making movies. All right. That's so I'm curious too.
Like as different as Jason X is from all the other. Remember Jason X? It was basically an episode of the show Andromeda. So
was that the one where they're in space?
It was in space, yeah.
Yeah, buddy.
And that's one of the ones I've only caught in YouTube rabbit holes, and I looked the piece of that movie, and I was like, huh?
It was the Jason X of the
only a sequel in name. And then the third one's a prequel, and that's the one that's just like, here's how everything works, and this is why. And it's like,
you need to know.
Fuck you.
Things not necessary.
I'm see Jaws as a baby shark.
So I'm curious, like, so being on about a year into Cult of Films here, mm-hmm. and we've gone through a bunch of films, and I have this general feeling about movies from like the mid to late 90s, and I'm wondering, like, if there are other factors why this maybe is cult of film, but maybe people forgot about it. And I'm thinking about in 97, or can we think of any? I know we've looked at some other movies and wondered why, like decent movies, wondering why they didn't make a bigger splash, realizing that their opening weekend was some huge blockbuster, like 1996 and 95. It seemed to have like these gigantic movies that hit that everybody remembers, kind of thing.
For what it was, though, for how small of a budget and being a small unknown Canadian film, it did. It really banged. Like $9 million in 1997. That's the year of Titanic, Batman and Robin, Good Will Hunting. You know, there was, just monster movies. Men in Black.
Because I'm feeling like there's a few things going on with movies. Like, I'm getting this sense of movies from mid to late 90s. Sometimes it almost feels like there's sort of like this identity crisis for the movie industry at that time. Like there are people who have their name established, and then you've got people who don't have their name established. Identity crisis is the only thing that comes to mind to me. And they were trying something new here, but I'm also curious, like, what were they getting dwarfed by? And what
Rounders, Blade, Saving Private Ryan, Armageddon.
Blade and Saving Private Ryan would have definitely dwarfed them.
Like, this was all the weekend of September 11th, 1998. Rounders, Something About Mary, Blade, Saving Private Ryan, Snake Eyes, Armageddon.
Jesus.
You know, The Mask of Zorro, Slums of Beverly Hills, like The Negotiator. All that stuff was like in and around the box office at that time.
So those are A-listers. Also,
this came out in September, like when everybody was at the movies. Like this never had a chance.
No, and no, I don't think it thought it would either. This isn't a huge.
It came out on
film.
16 screens.
Yeah.
Seriously?
16 screens.
This was Trimark Pictures, like, back when there was a Trimark Pictures. This wasn't, Disney or anything behind it. I think it really surprised people, or it probably surprised the filmmakers that it even made $9 million.
It had a $60,000 opening weekend on 16 screens when all those other movies were out.
So,
the people who wanted to see this movie were probably seeing Blade a second time.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot going on. This was up against quite a bit.
So, okay. Yeah, that seems to be like whenever we're covering cult films from late 90s, I'm getting that feeling like they're up against a lot of big names and big production.
This movie is literally streaming free everywhere. Amazon Prime, Tubi, YouTube.
I think IMDb has it free.
Yeah. Literally everywhere. If you haven't seen this film, I mean, and you're into, especially if you're into cult films, like if you're watching this channel for cult movie ideas, this is like, top 50 cult films of all time?
So here's what this movie isn't. It's not torture porn. It's not a gore fest. I feel like, it's like the Die Hard that launched all of the terrible action movies, and everyone's like, well, I'm not going to watch Die Hard now because I've seen Commando. But
this holds up.
Cube is not responsible, for Escape Room.
Yeah.
It's not responsible for Saw 6. It influenced those, but it's not Cube's fault, and Cube isn't, what came after it. So if you're worried about oh man, I don't want to watch another Eli Roth torture movie, don't worry, that this isn't what that is.
No. Way more of a psychological thriller. And like I said at the beginning of this holds up so well because of they took out everything that would timestamp it. So it could be made in the 80s, it could be made in 2021, and it you can't tell. It doesn't matter. The effects are I think the effects still hold up to this day, especially the practical effects, the makeup effects. There are some, that one scene that you were talking about in the beginning where it shows the fence that comes down. Okay, sure. The CG, it was 1997. What do you want? There are some places, few and far between in this movie, where you're okay, this feels a little more 90s.
Well, and they really didn't, and that's the thing. They didn't really lean on the CG that much.
Right.
They open up with it. They show some bits of it when they're moving that one cube around at the very end, but they did kind of. That was another thing. They teased graphics, they teased murder rooms, but really they did turn it into psychological, and that was definitely one of the more refreshing parts of this movie. And
you can do that on a budget. Mm-hmm. They really made the most of what they could with the budget they had, which is why stuff like Paranormal Activity, got really creative on a budget, and then they're like, oh, we think what people like is the ghost room, so we're going to make Paranormal Activity with $90 million. It's the Clerks effect, right? You give people more money to make a cube, you're going to make a bullshit cube, because Cube worked because the restrictions bred creativity. When you remove the restrictions, what are you left with?
If Kevin Smith was one of the people stuck in the cube, do you think there would have been a donkey show in one of the cubes?
They just made fart jokes the whole time. I don't know. Kevin Smith would have gotten real high and figured out how many factors are in the number 987.
They would have gotten so high in the first room, he wouldn't have had to go through the other rooms. He just had to sit there and wait.
He's I think it's a bridge.
Him giving Jason Mewes a Dutch rudder. God, we love Kevin Smith. Yeah, that is our review of Cube. I mean, yeah, definitely seek this one out. It's not going to cost you a thing. Jason and Johnny, we survived the Cube, gentlemen. So now that we're out in the bright light, where can we find everyone?
I'm Jason E. Alt on Twitter, and if you check my pinned tweet, you have a list of all the other things I do on the internet.
All right, and Johnny Mulligans.
You can find me hanging out here with John at Cult of Films, and you can find me on Twitter at CMDR_Hamilton. That's my EDH handle type thing for Magic the Gathering.
Perfect. You can find me at John the Host. You can follow this very podcast at The Cult of Film. So until next time,